Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified career strategist and executive coach. And what I do is I help driven, experienced professionals remove career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, income, and influence. And speaking of impact and income, my book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income, is coming out next week on Wednesday. I am so excited, and I hope you all will join me for an amazing launch week next week, particularly on Wednesday. We'll be having the live show, not on Tuesday next week, but as Wednesday, the 27th, is a launch day for my book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income. And I look forward to seeing you there. Just know there'll be a lot of information on social media about that leading up to the show. Now, if you've never seen me or heard me or seen my smiling face before, you can learn more about me at coachurban.com. Right down here, just check that out. And if you'd like to learn more about the book and get in on the launch party, go to coachurban.com and navigate to books. Okay. And as you tune into the show, please say your name, say hi, say where you're from. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to welcome you to the show because we have an amazing show today. Today, we are talking to Sheryl Lyons, who will be sharing with us how to spark your leadership success. Now, you may have either you may be a leader already, or you may be an emerging leader and wondering how you can navigate into the leadership realm and what that might look like for you. And most importantly, how to succeed as a leader, because oftentimes what we are taught in more traditional modes does not necessarily translate into leadership, quote unquote, success. Now, a little bit about Sheryl. Sheryl is a business leader. She's a management consultant and a certified master coach with a passion for building vibrant workplace cultures that positively impact company performance and personal performance. Her solutions create strategic clarity, grow managers into effective leaders, and equip leadership teams to thrive. And I'm very excited to have her on the show today because you may have wondered why some managers excel and others don't. So what's that secret sauce? And I'm really excited to learn from Sheryl today more about that. Great to see you, Gail, tuning in today from Porter, Texas. And as you hop in on the show or you're watching the replay later, be sure to put your questions or comments in the chat. We will be notified and we will get back to you. So without further ado, very excited to bring to you Sheryl. Sheryl, great to see you and have you on the show today to talk about how to spark your leadership success.
Great to see you too, Erin, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am, it's interesting when we were talking, prior to the show and getting ready to talk about the show topic, you mentioned in some of the materials you shared with me, what gets you here basically doesn't get you there, as to quote Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. When you're talking about and being emerging into leadership, becoming a manager or moving up in leadership ranks, some of the habits and behaviors that served you very well to get to that point don't necessarily continue to help you thrive. And I'd love to hear from you a few of those top ones that you see that hamstring emerging leaders and their success.
Well, great. Yes, I've been consulting now for over 22 years, and most of that has been spent in small and mid-sized businesses, helping leaders create a vibrant culture that gives them a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. And as you well know, a company's culture lives and dies by its leadership team and how they carry themselves, how they perform, and how they behave. Both the good behaviors and the bad get passed along to their people as the model for success. Mm-hmm. And so I work with a lot of leaders to get to see what are some of those struggles. And in my 22 years, it seems like the symptoms are all the same. It's just the background that's different. It's the setting that's different.
Right.
And so I love to work with particularly new leaders who are entering into that challenge. They've been wonderful professionals. They've excelled through that, invest in you and show what you can do to get them to a certain level in their careers. And then when they get to a leadership position, it certainly takes different behavior and a different mindset, most importantly, to help them get through that journey and accelerate to finding their own personal and unique style and being what we all want to be ultimately is an effective leader.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Gail shared with me, she's like, I've been waiting for the program all week. And those nuggets for Cheryl will share. So great to see you, Gail. And I know she'll be sharing some golden nuggets. Also good to see you, Cornisha and Jesse, tuning in to the show. And as you tune into the show, if you'd like to ask any questions as we proceed through our conversation, please do put that in the comments in the chat, because we're here to help you thrive as a leader. And you shared, earlier, Cheryl, some of those common, themes that you're seeing between individuals who are merging into leadership. And it doesn't really matter who they are. It seems to be the same across the board. What would be one of those you'd be willing to share with us? That challenge that seems to, sabotage people sometimes.
Right. Well, like I said, it has to do with a mind shift. And what, as you just said, what got you here won't get you there. When you're working as a professional and relying on yourself, it is about what you can do, what you promise. Yeah. And so your career is very much a reflective of your own production. When you get to be a leader, the emphasis is no longer on your own production. Mm-hmm. That is not what gets you to the next level. And that's what makes you effective as a leader. And so what I find a lot is managers not working at that elevated level. They've been given the elevated position, but the tendency is, I'm going to dive in and be one of the troops with my employees. Right. I'm going to show them that I'm here with them. Mm-hmm. So I've seen things like, the sales manager who goes and runs after that opportunity because his sales rep doesn't want to do it or can't do it. Mm-hmm. Or the HR manager who prided herself. I remember her telling me, like, we stayed up late on Christmas Eve to get payroll out, and I was there with my payroll person getting it done. Or, the CFO who I walk in their office and, hey, who are you just on the phone with? Oh, that was one of my customers. They're trying to figure out how to apply their payment. And so in each of those situations, I have asked the questions that have led to, are you best serving your people by doing the work or by focusing on the people that are doing the work? When you make that transition into leadership, it's no longer betting on yourself and you fulfilling your own promises. It's learning how to get things done through others. And so that would be, not the sales manager going and doing the job for the individual, because they have the right intentions, right? I'm helping the team, I'm contributing as a member. But what they're lacking is, why is that salesperson hesitating? That is your job now, is to understand the hesitation and help that individual get on the path of success. You doing their job for them is only enabling that same behavior.
That's exactly right.
Behavior you tolerate, you encourage every time.
That's right. Sending the wrong message too. There's something I learned in leadership psychology called the expectancy effect, and that works not just in scientific experiments. It also works within individuals, particularly in leadership positions, because the influence of a leader, as you alluded to earlier, is much more poignant because we model our leaders, consciously or unconsciously, their behaviors. So think about that. Which is important because the leader models behavior and it sets the tone, if you will, for the organization, their team. Also, what if, let's just say, that sales manager, by going out and doing that work for that individual, might be sending the message, hey, I think you're incompetent. And then what happens is that person, that affects their psyche, then they start to rethink things that would normally take risk on and be more proactive. They rethink that. And then all of a sudden they're exhibiting more of the behavior that, seems like they don't know what they're doing, which perpetuates more of that person responding in that way. And it's like what we call this negative cycle, right? It's a negative spiral. So that's something to keep in mind, when we're stepping in as leaders. We actually, to your point, Are we doing the right thing?
Are you doing the right thing and working at the right level? To me, it's a matter of focus. Mm-hmm. And again, that tendency is I'm going to go back to doing what I've always done before, which is crank out the work and produce. Right. And so the tendency is you can no longer see yourself as that being your value. Your value then has to shift to people and process. Mm-hmm. How do I make that person effective? It's connecting with them one-on-one to ensure they have the skills, they have the confidence, they're getting the exposure and the experience so that they can continue to progress. And then it's on process. It's people and process. Is there a way for you to become more efficient? Or in the example of the HR director staying late for payroll, I challenge her, sounds to me like you don't have the right payroll provider. Fix the problem. Don't perpetuate the problem and roll up your sleeves and say, I'm in this with you. Remove the muck. Don't jump into it with them. And please understand, I'm not saying
remove the muck. Everybody listening, write that down. Remove the muck. Don't jump into it with them.
Right. That's the focus. Right. So, and so many times I just see managers who miss that connection, and the tendency is to dive back into the work because that's what's always made them successful before.
What got them here. Right.
Yeah.
And for those of you tuning in, have you ever experienced leadership that would oftentimes jump in and try to problem solve instead of empowering you to problem solve? And, or have you found yourself as a leader feeling like, ooh, I'm not sure if they can do this. Let me just help them. Have you been guilty? And it's okay. It's okay. This is safe space. You can share if you've experienced that, either vicariously from leadership or as a leader yourself. And Cheryl, for you, I'd love to know what your thoughts are, because what gets people to a certain point, oftentimes in organizations, to be promoted is by working very hard. By being put their performance, right? They're measured by performance. Oh, you're a great performer. Let's elevate you to a leadership role, which has nothing to do with your performance necessarily, but is not the same set of skills, right? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, in those situations, I often go back to the leadership, right? The executive leadership, the person who gets to pick those people who were good performers. And there's a couple of things that I always recommend that they do. And number one is to acknowledge that this is the quintessential leadership experience. So don't just throw somebody into the deep end of the pool and have them sink or swim. You have to acknowledge that there is a transition that has to be made, and you have to pitfalls. These are the road bumps along the way. Mm-hmm. And the second thing to do is to equip them to accelerate through that process and not just muddle through it and find their own way. Acknowledging it and then teaching them how to build those skills. How do you not rip it from your employee's hand and do it, but rather teach them the process of thinking through it, and how that's better in the long run, rather than it's just faster if I just do it for them.
Oh my gosh, yes. Now, admit it. For those of you tuning in, whether it's now or later, if you're watching the replay, have you found yourself saying, and I have found myself saying this, if I want it done right, I'll just do it myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the tendency, right? And so that's where you have to have that mental shift of, okay, I'm doing it again. I'm stopping myself. What's the way I should be addressing this, addressing the person, addressing the process, teaching the skills along the way, rather than jumping in and solving the issue. And please understand, I want to make sure that we're not going completely off of the edge of the cliff. I'm not saying that managers should never do the work for their people, right? There is a level of that. I'm gonna jump into the weeds with you. I'm gonna pull the load just as hard. My point is that can no longer be the sole focus, right? You want to do that to build camaraderie, to build that relatability with the work. But the focus has to shift to people and process over production.
Right. And for those people who would be considering leadership positions, maybe you are like I don't know, everybody else who says, oh, I want to move up into leadership. I want to be a manager. I want to move up further into a senior leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And I share with those individuals when they're trying to make that decision, how they want to grow their career. Okay, that's great. Good for you to have ambition, et cetera. And are you comfortable with letting go of being the technical expert and embracing more of becoming a people expert? Because at the leadership level, that really truly is about people. And as you mentioned, processes and letting go of being the expert in all the little things and embracing a different perspective, that mindset shift you mentioned earlier. And Cheryl, one of the things I might like to know from you is if someone is struggling with that letting go of being that expert, of doing the work, and not, embracing more of the people and the process side of it. Because when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And what would it be, that thing that you would say that would help them overcome that? How they become more aware, perhaps, that might be going on?
It's certainly an exercise in self-realization, right? So a lot of times I will ask, as a coach, you help people explore their own and from their own experiences. One exercise that I do with leaders is I start out a leadership workshop by asking them who are leaders that they admire in their life, that they have had, whether it be coaches or professors or managers. And then on the flip side of that, managers or leaders who they did not respect or were not considered effective. And we look at those behaviors. What are the behaviors from the people on the right side of that list versus the left side of the list? And then from that, so from that exercise, you get to show you do know the model for good leadership, your own definition for good leadership. And that's what speaks to your own individual style. So a way that I can get them to sort of explore what they want to be is, now look at those two lists. Do you do anything in the column of the bad leaders? And invariably, there's always at least one that, yes, I micromanage, or I jump in and I do the work, or I rip it from their hands and take care of it. So the flip side is to keep those behaviors of the managers and the leaders that you do admire, that you do wish to emulate, keep them close at hand. And ask yourself, when you're working with a direct report or even somebody who's a peer, right? You don't necessarily have to have the title to be a leader and to be the model that others are going to follow. You just have to lead. But when you're looking at that and you ask yourself, how am I showing up? How do I show up through my own eyes in this interaction with this individual? And if you're really honest with yourself, then the next question is, how do I want to show up with this interaction and with this individual? How do I want to come across? I always speak about making your intentions known, right? My intention in this conversation is to address an issue so that you can get on the path to success, so that you can be successful and promoted and have good performance and those things, right? When somebody feels like their manager is getting on their case or correcting, they miss the intention behind it. Are you paving my path to the door? Or is this a formal write-up that's, helping you get to the point where you can fire me one day? Or are you truly investing in me and my development? And that, when that intention becomes clear, that can take you so far with any direct report or anybody who's looking to you for leadership, because it shows you're investing in the person, right? Which is so much more important than the production.
It is. It's so much more powerful. And Gail also shared here, understanding the logic of the task helps the employee feel, quote unquote, power. My job as a leader is to help employees grow, so they can, thrive. I mean, that's the whole point. And it's interesting because someone asked me a couple of weeks ago when I was interviewing for a podcast show, they said, what's your definition of leadership? And I said, well, that's a great question. My definition of leadership is to be a servant leader. That's a term that's fairly well and widely known. And you exist as a leader to support the development and the goals of your team. Ultimately the company goals, but to help them thrive. You're there to remove roadblocks. You are there to help them be better at what they do. That's what you are there for. It's not the, hey, look at me show.
Right.
Right. Look at me.
Right.
And that's one of the things I call the Superman or Superwoman syndrome. You dive in, you've got that cape flying behind you. I saved the day. And the challenge here with overcoming that is we get a hefty shot of dopamine when we do this. Because when we save the day, we feel this sense of accomplishment. Oh boy, I've done the thing. Well, and one, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to save the day? And two, wouldn't it be great if you could help your team do that if it's necessary, right?
How much more meaningful can it be when one of your team members gets to be the hero and you get to know I was behind their success? To me, that's much more meaningful than your own success, is getting to see others succeed. And so it is about nurturing them along. I mean, I get questions a lot about, what if I don't know exactly how to do the task of somebody in my, that's my direct report? And I remind them that it's not their job to know everything, but it is their job to be able to progress the performance of the individuals. So a lot of it is, people come to you not because they need help with the task. They're looking for that boost of confidence. So it is about, well, what would you do in this situation? Tell me how you would solve this problem. And then it's about validating that and telling them, see, you do know how to do this. You do have the resources available. You do have the knowledge. And a lot of times that's all they really need to keep fueled and to keep going, is knowing that they're not reliant on somebody else. And to me, that's very empowering, and it just trickles down the organization if you can do that.
Absolutely. And also, not doing that in a way where the person feels like, oh, well, you're just shoving me off, don't want to deal with whatever it is. Taking that time and listening with intent, which is a skill set, and being cautious of our body language. What's the message we're sending, whether it be through the lens of a camera or in person. And that's also important. You hear a lot right now, Cheryl, about executive presence. And if I were to ask you, and you're laughing, I know you're like, oh yeah, here we go. If I was to ask you to define executive presence, what would that mean to you?
I'll tell you, I know a lot of people's definition of executive presence is who is the loudest and the largest in the room, right? How much space do I take up, and how much can I overpower everybody under me? But no, it's that ability to be able to listen to what's in between the lines, to listen to the words that are not being said, to read the room. And then when you do speak, it's bringing a perspective and some information that might otherwise not have been heard or listened to. So I think executive presence has a lot to do with comfort and confidence in your own skin when you're not speaking.
Right. I think, was it Nelson Mandela that said, practice being the last to speak? I think it was. I may misquote, but I believe it was Nelson Mandela. And there's a really good reason for that, because if you as a leader can practice being the last to speak, one, you're not stifling the innovation of your team, because your team will, if you start sharing, well, I think we should do this, blah, 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 blah. Well, if so, you think someone is going to disagree with you? No, they want a paycheck. So, of course, they're not going to disagree with you. And they'll most likely go along with whatever you said. And that doesn't encourage innovation. So if you sit and you listen and you encourage other people to share and talk and collaborate, and then at the end, you can come in and not only acknowledge the efforts of the team and help them, of course, align with the vision of the company or whatever needs to happen at a higher level, and then encourage them and give them support they need, and they think you're brilliant, right? They've really, done that, that work and that marination and that collaboration to have all that happen. And you're really there to guide, not steer. And that's
Right.
often, I think, what people misinterpret executive presence, as you mentioned, being the loudest in the room. That's a presence. I don't think it's executive necessarily. It is a presence. Yeah. And it's interesting because in Eastern cultures, or the Western, Eastern cultures, yeah, Eastern cultures, it's Asian cultures, China, Vietnam, and that sort of thing. They really revere the power of silence. And instead, versus American cultures, for example, or Western cultures, we really do have this extrovert ideal that the person who's smartest is the ones who's talking the most. No.
Yeah, it is often the last person to speak, and good management. Bringing it back to leadership in its practice is, not everybody is meant to be a manager, right? So that's one of the things that I mentioned to the executives that I consult and that I coach is, don't make being a supervisor or being a manager the only semblance of prestige around your organization. You do need to promote your subject matter experts and the people who are technical experts, right? There has to be promotion other than people management in your organization. But managers who take to this and who understand it, there's a natural tendency for them to already be helpers, right? They're helping people already before they're ever promoted. And a good manager is always going to take more of their fair share of the blame and less of their fair share of the credit, right? It's all about the success of the team and the team's ultimate performance. And when that happens, then it's a good reflection on the manager and vice versa. When the team performs well, it reflects well on the manager. And don't forget, you can't keep climbing the ladder of career success without being able to bring up the people behind you and invest in them. Think about the people who helped get you where you are, and how are you going back and paying that forward and helping the next generation, so to speak, or the next level of leaders in their development. It's all about accelerating that process and that mind shift that we've been talking about.
I love that what you just shared, about bringing those people up and accelerating other people's growth. And that's what it's about. I think John Maxwell shares that the epitome of leadership is when you are then creating leaders, right? And that's the culmination of your leadership ability, is truly when you have come to a point in your leadership acumen that you then create other leaders and are lifting them up, and they are coming along with you. And that's truly what it's about, is you're, as an individual, as a leader. And by the way, you can be a leader and you don't have a title.
Yeah.
Happens all the time. Anybody who's a parent, if you're a parent out there, raise your hand. And if you think has anything to do with leadership, please let me know. I'm sure you may agree. But bringing and involving and helping these people thrive and grow, that is really what it's about,
Right.
Yeah, it's an amazing process. And when you see that and when you're a part of that, there's nothing quite like it. The feeling that you get, there's nothing quite like that.
Right.
What else can you share, Cheryl, with the folks that are tuning in? And I'll also say that as you're tuning in, if you have any questions about, take for example, and this is a question I might have for you, Cheryl, if you'd like to share with us. If you are looking to emerge into leadership, and other than being a top performer, which is oftentimes what the metric might be, and for good leaders, that's not necessarily the metric for you to be a leader, by the way. What would be that focus you would want to have to elevate your career into leadership? What might you work on more to let those decision makers know that, hey, I'm ready for leadership?
Right. Well, I think you always have to be able to, first of all, I think you have to demonstrate a desire for it. Again, hopefully it's not the only avenue in your organization for upward mobility and to be promoted. And the way to get recognized as a leader is to practice it, every day. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And I often find, man, in my 22 years, Erin, you've probably seen this a lot in your career coaching as well, that you don't get the promotion, the title, the pay bump, the corner office until you've already demonstrated that you can do the job. So many times you find yourself, man, I'm doing it. I might as well go ask for the title. So there's so much within people's ability. And I would recommend that they look at how they're investing in others. One thing they should be able to do when they go to a supervisor or a leader and say, I am interested in a career path in management, be prepared for the question, name 3 people whose career you've helped promote and move up already. And if you're already sort of naturally doing that because you naturally invest in people and others and increase their skill set and awareness and their perspective and encourage them naturally, then you've got a lot of the skill sets already needed. Then it's just a matter of how do you practice those, getting close to those individuals and finding out, what do you want from this job? What do you want to learn? Where is it taking you? Where are you headed? And how can I help you get there? If you can ask those questions and then help your people come up with those goals, even if they're not your direct reports, if you are the model of success for others, it's about sharing that knowledge, letting others light their candle by that knowledge. And if you can perpetuate that, then you are already making a case for how you deserve an opportunity to lead and to manage, because you're effectively already doing it.
That's absolutely right. What I tell people who are interested in leadership, I was like, find opportunities. And it doesn't necessarily, sometimes people struggle to find that opportunity within their organization. And I would encourage you to consider professional organizations. They're always looking for volunteers, particularly for board members, for people to help that leadership of that organization thrive and work and function. And you can make some good connections along the way, so that doesn't hurt either. So if it's not within the organization, if there's just absolutely no opportunity for you to practice leadership skills and develop that, then look outside or your organization, volunteering, professional organizations, etc. And also note that project management, if you have an opportunity to do a special project, participate, collaborate, and or lead a special project within your organization, that is tremendously helpful as well, and a tangible takeaway that you can bring to those key decision makers. Say, see, I did this, and I've done these things over here, and I'm ready. The biggest mistake I see, Cheryl, is people just don't communicate that this is what they want. They don't communicate their career goals, if they have them to begin with. They work really hard and they hope people will notice. And I mentioned this in my book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income. But people just work really hard and try to be the best at what they do. And they just think people will just magically understand that this is what they want to do with their career.
Right.
And
well, Erin,
that they don't think you want to work really hard. I don't know.
Yeah. Part of my story, and I tell this to a lot of people that I coach and that I consult as well. I mean, part of my story is the only reason I was a hired CEO and an experienced CEO was because I went and I asked for the job. You're not always going to have that recognition. So it's, what do I need to showcase? Is it a special project? Is it taking on somebody to coach? Is it coming up with a new idea and then implementing that idea? There's lots of different ways to practice leadership. And I kind of bringing this back to where we started from, it all comes back to your behavior as well. Mm-hmm. So to have that self-awareness of how do you show up, when you think about those leadership behaviors, you have to be careful about things like, am I adding to the drama or am I taking away from the drama? Wow. Am I adding to the panic or am I taking away and providing calm? How you carry yourself is modeling leadership behavior. So to me, I think that's one of the very first things that we can do to emulate those leadership behaviors that we all know we want to set that example, is to be able to have that self-check, or have someone do it for you, a trusted friend, or find a way to get feedback. I do a lot of 360 evaluations on my leadership so that they can recognize blind spots, recognize where they are strong, because part of that is what keeps us going in that leadership path, right? Is recognize and acknowledge where you're strong. But then once you know where you are weak, you can make very specific and targeted goals to help you continue your progression and shore up some of those leadership skills.
All right. I do recommend that as well. You're on point, Cheryl, with 360-degree reviews. I use third-party reviews, also do surveys that I create, or personal interviews, depending on the organization, what their needs are. But it's so important. We don't grow unless we get feedback. I mean, just think of it. As a human being, that's how we grow. That's how we learn. I mean, when you watch a toddler start to learn how to walk, right? And they get feedback. They fall, well, that didn't work. And there's some tears shed and things, and they work through it, but they're determined, right? So they continue to try. And with that feedback, they start to realize, okay, this is working. This is not working. If anybody has ever sailed a boat, it's a giant experience in feedback.
Right.
We're tacking into the wind, where you're getting feedback from that wind and knowing, okay, how do I need to navigate this? So when we're talking about navigating our career journey, getting that feedback is so incredibly important. I share this in my book as well. But Gail has a really good note here. She says, once you embrace leadership, you cannot go back. It's a continuous journey. And it's funny. It's like, yeah, once you're there, you've embraced it, you've embodied it. And it's a wonderful thing, I feel, to be on that journey. I mean, it certainly changed my life. I was more of a victim mentality person a long time ago. And when I started to embrace leadership and understanding what that really meant, adding value to people, helping people thrive, it changed my entire life for the better. It did. I was less me-centered and more, selfless, giving. And when I turned that corner, that's truly when I started to see my career and my life improve.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Feedback is tremendous. I've lived my whole life with the mantra that feedback is a gift. Mm-hmm. So you need to give it generously and receive it graciously. Because that is the intent, right? We can't continue on our path or continue to improve without getting that feedback loop. And so that's another thing that you can do if you're wanting to dip your toe in the pool of leadership and try it out, is to focus on some of those relationships. Find somebody who will give you open feedback. Mm-hmm. And I always say this with whenever you do get into a leadership position, keep that feedback loop going, right? If you're asking for feedback as a leader, your people are going to be much more open to receiving feedback. And it's this constant loop. If you can create that constant loop, then those tough conversations are so much easier to approach and to have, because there's a foundation. The longer we take, this is what I find a lot of managers doing, is avoiding those difficult, crucial conversations that get people unstuck. And what I have to do is help them recognize that inaction is an action, it's a choice, and you're not serving your people by holding back that feedback.
That's right.
So if you need to practice it, write it up, think again, what is your intention in having the conversation? Start with that. But if you're that type of person who knows how to give, constructive, helpful, but empathetic feedback that people can actually act on, that's a huge leadership behavior that, again, can be honed and practiced along your way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. And if anybody has any other questions before we wrap up the show, Love to hear your questions or comments, anything that you have for us about either, being an emerging leader or someone who is currently a leader. Again, as I mentioned before, you don't necessarily have to have a title to be a leader. And if there's any questions you have for Cheryl and or myself about how to thrive as a leader or move into an effective leadership role and what that might look like for you, and if there's any stumbling blocks you're experiencing right now, I'm happy to help you. And if you're watching the replay later, just know the same holds true. Feel free to put those questions that you have in the comments, and we'll be notified during the show. We'll have that information back to you. So before we wrap up, Cheryl, I'd love to know, how can people contact you and learn more about what you do and how you help companies and individuals thrive?
Yes, they may visit my website, which is culture-spark.com. We help leaders build culture as a competitive advantage, working closely with leadership teams on their team dynamics and disciplines and structures that help them build those different components that create culture. And as we all know, we know great companies that have great cultures that help propel them forward. And it is my passion to work with those companies who know that culture can make a difference, and they're willing to invest in that and in their people to get there. So it's a wonderful work, very enjoyable, and I'd love to help others along in their journey.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Cheryl. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, and I highly recommend, reaching out to her if you are interested in having your leadership culture thrive and spark more innovation within the cultures, because now I think more than ever, people are starting to realize how important that is. Even with the interviews you're having these days are more around culture and culture fits, and what's your personality like, not just your performance, and how well do you deal with conflict, what's that persona that you exude to the world, that presence you deliver, and your brand, what is that brand? And there's more emphasis and focus on that now more than ever. People can no longer ignore the importance of the people side of leadership, particularly. And embracing that. So,
right. Yes.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, Cheryl. I am so thrilled to have you here and learn more about how to become a more effective leader and spark that leadership transformation. And reach out to Culture Spark and learn more about them. Next week, we will have a launch party. So the regular show will not be on Tuesdays. We'll have a launch party on Wednesday. So I hope to see you there. And again, if you are not watching this live, you're watching the replay, just know that we will be happy to answer your comments or questions as soon as we get them and get notified. As always, it's been a deep pleasure. Cheryl, it's been a deep pleasure having you on the show. I am just absolutely beyond thrilled to have you here, and it's been fun speaking with you and learning more about leadership, what to avoid, what works, what doesn't, and just know what got you here won't get you there. And how to become more aware as an intentional leader, and to help you elevate your career. So as always,
well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And until next time, we will see you later. Have a great day, everybody.